When billionaire William Chen decided to test his employees in Mandarin, he never expected the only perfect answer to come from a 7-year-old girl hiding behind a supply closet. But no one imagined what would come next. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The 42nd floor of the Chen Industries Tower buzzed with nervous energy as employees gathered in the main conference room. William Chen, the 32-year-old billionaire CEO, stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his sharp suit perfectly tailored and his dark eyes scanning the faces before him. Born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrants, William had built his tech empire from nothing, and today he had something special planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in America, "today we're doing something different. I'm looking for hidden talents in our company, skills that might be overlooked in traditional evaluations." In the back corner of the conference room, Maria Rodriguez quietly wiped down the water glasses, her movements so practiced and silent that most people forgot she was there. At 45, Maria had been the night cleaning supervisor at Chen Industries for 3 years, and she knew every corner of this building. What most people didn't know was that Maria spoke 5 languages fluently, including Mandarin, a skill she'd acquired during her younger years working as a translator before circumstances forced her into cleaning jobs to support her daughter. 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat hidden behind a supply cart in the hallway, her big brown eyes wide with curiosity. School had ended early due to a teacher's meeting, and Maria hadn't been able to find childcare. Emma often spent these afternoons quietly doing homework in empty offices, staying invisible while her mother worked. She'd become an expert at listening to the adult conversations that filled these corporate halls. "The test is simple," William continued, switching seamlessly into Mandarin. "I want each of you to answer this question in Mandarin. What is the most important quality for innovation in the modern business world, and how would you implement it in a team setting?" The room fell silent. Faces around the table showed confusion and panic. Most employees had no idea their CEO spoke Mandarin fluently, let alone expected them to respond in it. William's expression remained neutral, but internally he was disappointed. He'd hoped to find someone in his company who shared his cultural background and could help him expand into Asian markets. Minutes passed. Department heads shuffled papers nervously. The marketing director cleared her throat several times, but said nothing. The head of operations stared at his hands. William's disappointment grew with each passing second. From behind the supply cart, Emma had heard every word. During the countless evenings she'd spent in these halls while her mother cleaned, she'd overheard hundreds of William's phone calls to business partners in Shanghai and Beijing. His voice was familiar to her, warm but commanding, just like now. Without realizing it, Emma had absorbed not just the language, but the nuances of business terminology he used. Something inside Emma stirred. She knew the answer. The words formed perfectly in her mind in Mandarin, complete with the proper business terminology she'd heard William use so many times. Before she could stop herself, Emma stepped out from behind the cart. "Innovation requires cultural bridges," Emma said clearly, in perfect Mandarin, her small voice carrying through the silent conference room. "The most important quality is linguistic diversity, because it allows teams to understand global perspectives. Implementation should begin with cross-cultural communication training and hiring practices that value multilingual abilities, creating an environment where different viewpoints can merge into revolutionary ideas." The conference room erupted into stunned silence. 40 executives turned to stare at the 7-year-old girl standing in the doorway, her school backpack still strapped to her shoulders and her long dark hair in neat braids. Maria dropped the cloth she was holding, her face going pale as she realized her daughter had just exposed them both to unimaginable consequences. William's mouth fell open. In 3 years of running this company, none of his high-paid executives had ever demonstrated the kind of sophisticated understanding of business strategy that this child had just displayed, in flawless Mandarin no less. The accent was perfect, the grammar impeccable, and the business insight was genuinely impressive. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" William asked, switching back to English, his voice filled with amazement rather than anger. Emma glanced nervously at her mother, then back at the intimidating figure at the head of the table. "I listen when you talk on the phone. Mom works late and I do homework in the empty offices. You always sound so smart when you talk to the people in China." Maria stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry. Emma shouldn't have been listening. We'll leave immediately and never—" "No," William said firmly, raising his hand to stop her. His mind was racing. This little girl had just demonstrated more business acumen and cultural awareness than his entire executive team combined. "Don't apologize. Emma, how long have you been listening to my calls?" Emma thought carefully, counting on her fingers. "Since Mom started working here, maybe 3 years. You talk about innovation a lot and respect, and how American companies need to understand Chinese culture better to make good partnerships." The room remained silent, executives exchanging bewildered glances. How had a 7-year-old absorbed complex business concepts that some of them still struggled with? William studied Emma's face, seeing intelligence far beyond her years, but also something else, a hunger for knowledge that reminded him of himself at that age. William walked slowly toward Emma, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. When he reached her, he knelt down to her eye level, something he'd never done with any adult in this building. "Emma, would you like to answer another question for me?" Emma nodded eagerly, her initial nervousness replaced by excitement. She'd never had an adult ask for her opinion before, especially not someone as important as Mr. Chen. "In Mandarin," William said, "tell me what you think American businesses get wrong when they try to work with Chinese companies." Without hesitation, Emma responded in fluent Mandarin. "They focus too much on quick profits and not enough on relationship building. In Chinese culture, trust takes time to develop. American executives often rush the process and miss opportunities for long-term partnerships. They also don't understand the importance of face and hierarchy in negotiations." Several executives gasped audibly. Maria's legs felt weak, and she grabbed the back of a chair for support. Her 7-year-old daughter was discussing international business strategy with the same confidence most adults used to talk about the weather. William stood up slowly, his mind working frantically. This wasn't just impressive, it was extraordinary. Emma had identified one of the key challenges he'd been struggling with for years. His attempts to expand into Asian markets had consistently failed because his executives didn't understand the cultural nuances Emma had just articulated perfectly. "Emma," William said softly, "how would you like to come to work with me tomorrow?" The next morning, Emma Rodriguez walked through the gleaming lobby of Chen Industries, holding her mother's hand, but everything felt different. Word of yesterday's conference room incident had spread through the building like wildfire, and employees who had never noticed the cleaning lady's daughter before now stared openly as they passed. Maria had barely slept, her mind spinning with worry and disbelief. She dressed Emma in her best school dress, a simple blue outfit from Target that looked painfully out of place among the designer suits and luxury accessories that filled the building's upper floors. "Remember, Mija," Maria whispered as they entered the elevator. "Be respectful and speak only when spoken to." Emma nodded solemnly, but inside she felt a thrill of excitement she'd never experienced before. For 3 years, she'd observed this world from the shadows, invisible and silent. Today, someone important wanted to hear what she had to say. William's corner office occupied the entire 45th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of San Francisco Bay. Emma had cleaned these windows with her mother countless times, but she'd never seen the view from this angle during daylight. The Golden Gate Bridge stretched majestically across the water, and the morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and blue. "Good morning, Emma," William said, rising from behind his massive desk. He'd deliberately dressed more casually today, khakis and a button-down shirt instead of his usual suit, hoping to make the little girl feel more comfortable. "Did you sleep well?" Emma nodded shyly, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the space and the importance of the man addressing her. Yesterday's confidence seemed to have evaporated in the bright light of his imposing office. "I have a proposition for you," William continued, gesturing toward two comfortable chairs arranged near the window. "I'd like you to listen to a phone call I'm making to a potential business partner in Beijing. Afterward, I want your honest opinion about how the conversation went." Maria started to protest. This was far beyond anything she could have imagined. But William's gentle but firm expression stopped her. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your daughter has a gift. Yesterday proved that. Today, I want to understand the extent of that gift." Durun. As if on cue, William's assistant knocked and entered with a small conference table setup, complete with child-sized headphones and a notepad. Emma's eyes widened at the professional treatment. No adult had ever taken her ideas seriously enough to provide her with actual business equipment. The call began at 9 a.m. sharp. William spoke in rapid Mandarin with Liu Wei, the CEO of a major manufacturing company in Beijing. Emma put on the headphones and listened intently, her young face screwing up in concentration as she followed the complex negotiations about supply chain management and production schedules. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. Emma took notes in her neat 7-year-old handwriting, occasionally sketching little pictures to help her remember important points. Maria watched in amazement as her daughter transformed into someone she barely recognized, focused, analytical, completely absorbed in the business discussion. When the call ended, William turned to Emma with genuine curiosity. "So, what did you think?" Emma studied her notes for a moment, then looked up with serious eyes. "Mr. Liu didn't trust you completely," she said in English. "He kept asking the same questions in different ways, like he thought you might be lying about the delivery schedules. And when you talked about expanding the partnership, his voice got colder." William's eyebrows rose. Emma had identified something he'd sensed, but couldn't quite articulate. "What else?" "He's worried about cultural differences," Emma continued, warming to her subject. "When you mentioned the American team coming to Beijing for training, he used formal language that created distance. I think he's concerned that American workers won't respect Chinese traditions." William leaned forward, fascinated. "How could you tell all that from his tone of voice?" Emma tilted her head, thinking. "It's like when kids at school don't want to play with someone new. They're polite, but they use different words, and their voice sounds different. Mr. Liu was being polite, but he doesn't really want to work with Americans. He thinks you'll be difficult." The accuracy of Emma's assessment stunned William. He'd been trying to close this deal for 6 months, and Liu Wei had indeed been reluctant and suspicious throughout their negotiations. Emma had identified the core problem in a single conversation. "What would you suggest I do?" William asked, surprising himself with the question. He was asking a 7-year-old for business advice, and somehow it felt completely natural. Emma pursed her lips, a gesture that reminded William of his own grandmother when she was deep in thought. "You need to show him that you understand Chinese culture. Maybe send him something that proves you respect his traditions. And don't bring up the American team training right away. Let him get comfortable with you first." William pulled out his phone and began typing notes. Emma's suggestions aligned perfectly with everything he'd learned about Chinese business culture, but presented with a clarity that his expensive consultants had never achieved. "Emma," William said slowly, "how would you feel about coming to work with me every day after school for the next few weeks? I'll pay you a consulting fee, and we can set up a proper workspace for you." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? I can help with real business?" Maria finally found her voice. "Mr. Chen, this is incredibly generous, but Emma is just a child. She needs to focus on her schoolwork and normal 7-year-old activities." William nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, Emma's education comes first. But Mrs. Rodriguez, your daughter has demonstrated skills that could revolutionize how American companies approach international partnerships. I'd like to nurture that gift while ensuring she still has a normal childhood." Over the next 2 hours, William outlined his proposal. Emma would spend 2 hours after school, 3 days a week, listening to international business calls and providing cultural insights. She'd have her own small office adjacent to his, complete with child-friendly furniture and educational materials. Maria would be promoted to executive assistant for international affairs, with a salary increase that would allow them to move out of their cramped apartment. As the morning progressed, Emma's initial shyness completely disappeared. She asked William thoughtful questions about his business philosophy, offered insights about the cultural misunderstandings she'd observed in his previous calls, and even suggested alternative approaches to difficult negotiations. By lunchtime, William realized he was looking at the most valuable addition to his company in years. Emma wasn't just bilingual, she was culturally bilingual, able to navigate the subtle communication differences that destroyed most international business relationships. But as the day ended and Emma gathered her things to return to school, William couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. How had a cleaning lady's daughter developed such sophisticated understanding of business and culture? Maria Rodriguez was clearly more than she appeared to be, and William sensed that uncovering the truth about Emma's background might reveal secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about the people working in his building. "Same time tomorrow?" William asked as Emma headed toward the elevator. Emma grinned, her face glowing with happiness and purpose. "Yes, Mr. Chen. Tomorrow I want to tell you about the phone call you had with the lady from Tokyo last week. I think she likes you, but you missed all her hints about wanting a partnership." As the elevator doors closed, William stared thoughtfully at his reflection in the polished metal. In 24 hours, a 7-year-old girl had given him more valuable business insights than his entire executive team had provided in months. Tomorrow, he was going to start asking some serious questions about Emma Rodriguez and her mysteriously perceptive mother. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's first day as William's unofficial cultural consultant, and the transformation was remarkable. The small office adjacent to William's had been converted into a child-friendly workspace, complete with a desk scaled to Emma's size, shelves filled with books about international cultures, and a world map covered in colorful pins marking William's global business contacts. Emma had quickly established herself as an invaluable asset to the company. Her insights had already helped William successfully renegotiate 2 major contracts, one with the Beijing Manufacturing Company and another with a technology firm in Seoul. But it was her analysis of the Tokyo partnership opportunity that truly demonstrated her extraordinary abilities. "Mr. Chen," Emma had said after listening to a particularly frustrating call with Yamamoto Industries, "Ms. Yamamoto keeps mentioning cherry blossom season and asking if you've ever visited Japan in spring. She's not making small talk. She's inviting you to visit during the most beautiful time of year. In Japanese culture, sharing seasonal beauty with someone is a sign of friendship and respect." William had immediately booked a trip to Tokyo for the following month, and within hours of confirming his visit, Ms. Yamamoto had sent a preliminary partnership agreement worth $15 million, but success brought scrutiny. Other executives in the building had begun asking pointed questions about the little girl who seemed to have unlimited access to the CEO's office. During a senior staff meeting on Friday afternoon, tensions finally boiled over. "With all due respect, William," said Patricia Hartman, the sharp-tongued head of human resources, "having a child involved in sensitive business negotiations creates serious liability issues. What if she accidentally shares confidential information? What if competitors learn about our unconventional consulting arrangement?" William looked up from the quarterly reports he'd been reviewing, his expression neutral but his eyes cold. "Emma has demonstrated more business acumen in 3 weeks than some department heads have shown in 3 years, Patricia. Her insights have already generated over $20 million in new revenue." "That's not the point," Patricia continued, her voice becoming more aggressive. "She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand the legal implications of what she's hearing. And frankly, the whole arrangement looks unprofessional. What are we going to tell our shareholders when they find out we're taking business advice from a child?" The room fell silent. Other executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, clearly torn between amazement at Emma's contributions and concern about the unconventional nature of the situation. William stood slowly, his full height and commanding presence filling the space. "Emma has identified cultural nuances that our expensive consultants missed completely. She's prevented us from making costly mistakes in 3 different negotiations. If you have concerns about professionalism, perhaps you should examine why a 7-year-old understands international business better than our senior staff." Before Patricia could respond, William's assistant knocked and entered with a concerned expression. "Mr. Chen, there's a situation. Emma's mother needs to speak with you immediately. She seems very upset." William excused himself from the meeting and found Maria Rodriguez waiting in his office, her face pale and her hands trembling. Emma sat quietly in her small chair, her usual bright demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. "Mr. Chen," Maria began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something about Emma, about why she learned so quickly. But first, I need you to promise that this information won't put my daughter in danger." William felt a chill of apprehension. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd begun to suspect that Maria's background was far more complex than a simple cleaning lady's story. Her occasional use of sophisticated vocabulary, her perfect understanding of business terminology, and her obvious intelligence all suggested a history she hadn't shared. "Maria, whatever you need to tell me, Emma's safety is my primary concern," William said, settling into his chair. "Nothing is more important than protecting her." Maria took a deep breath, then looked directly into William's eyes. "My real name is Dr. Maria Elena Rodriguez Santos. I have a doctorate in international relations from Stanford University and a master's degree in linguistics from UC Berkeley. For 8 years, I worked as a senior cultural advisor for Fortune 500 companies, expanding into Latin American and Asian markets." The revelation hit William like a physical blow. The woman he'd assumed was an uneducated immigrant had credentials that surpassed most of his executive team. "Why are you working as a cleaning supervisor?" he asked quietly. 3 years ago, I discovered that my consulting firm was using my cultural expertise to help American companies exploit workers in developing countries," Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. "When I tried to expose the corruption, they destroyed my reputation and threatened Emma's safety. I had to disappear, start over with a new identity. Cleaning work was the only job I could find that didn't require background checks or references. Emma reached over and took her mother's hand, a gesture that revealed how much the 7-year-old understood about their difficult circumstances. "Mom had to protect us," Emma said simply. Bad people wanted to hurt her for telling the truth. William felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Emma's sophisticated understanding of business culture suddenly made perfect sense. She'd been raised by a world-class expert in international relations. Her ability to identify subtle communication patterns wasn't just natural talent. It was the result of growing up in an environment where cultural nuances were discussed as naturally as the weather. "Maria," William said slowly, "the people who threatened you, are they still a danger?" Maria nodded grimly. "Maria, my former firm, Global Cultural Dynamics, has connections to some very powerful corporations. If they discover where I am, if they learn that Emma has inherited my abilities." She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. William's mind raced through the implications. For 3 weeks, he'd been showcasing Emma's talents throughout his business network. If the wrong people learned about her abilities, if they connected her to Maria's past work, both mother and daughter could be in serious danger. But as William looked at Emma, brilliant, eager and trusting, he realized he couldn't simply send them away. Emma's gift was extraordinary, but more importantly, she and her mother had become important to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. "Here's what we're going to do," William said, with the decisive tone that had built his empire. "Officially, Maria, you're being promoted to Senior Cultural Advisor. We'll create a legitimate consulting position that explains Emma's presence and abilities. Unofficially, I'm going to make sure you both have the protection and resources you need to stay safe." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Chen, you don't understand the risks you'd be taking. These people have enormous influence. They could destroy your business just for helping us." William stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city where he'd built his fortune from nothing. "Maria, 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood business culture. Emma taught me that I knew almost nothing. You've both given me something invaluable, the chance to build genuine international partnerships based on respect and understanding rather than exploitation." He turned back to face them, his expression resolute. "Besides, I didn't become a billionaire by backing down from powerful enemies. If Global Cultural Dynamics wants a fight, they'll discover that William Chen doesn't lose battles that matter to him." As Friday afternoon sunlight streamed through the office windows, William began making plans that would protect Emma and Maria while allowing their extraordinary talents to flourish. But he also started preparing for the possibility that their peaceful new life was about to become much more complicated. Outside the office, Patricia Hartman stood near the assistant's desk, having overheard enough of the conversation to realize that the situation with Emma Rodriguez was far more significant than anyone had imagined. As she returned to her office, Patricia began composing an email to a contact she hadn't spoken to in years, someone who worked for a consulting firm called Global Cultural Dynamics. Monday morning arrived with an ominous email waiting in William's inbox. The sender was identified as Global Cultural Dynamics, and the subject line read, "Regarding stolen intellectual property and unauthorized use of proprietary methodologies." William's blood ran cold as he read the legal threats and demands for immediate termination of all consulting arrangements with former employee Dr. Maria Elena Rodriguez Santos and her minor child. The email was precisely crafted to sound official and intimidating, but William recognized it for what it was, a warning shot. Someone had discovered Maria's location and was preparing to strike. As he finished reading, his assistant buzzed the intercom with urgent news. "Mr. Chen, there are 3 people from Global Cultural Dynamics in the lobby demanding to speak with you immediately. They claim to have legal authority to remove Emma Rodriguez from the building." William's jaw tightened. The confrontation he'd been preparing for had arrived sooner than expected. "Send them to conference room B and tell them I'll be down in 10 minutes. And please ask Maria and Emma to come to my office immediately." When Maria and Emma arrived, William could see that Maria had already sensed trouble. Her face was pale, and she held Emma's hand protectively. Emma, dressed in her favorite purple dress with her hair in careful braids, seemed confused by the tension radiating from both adults. "They found us, didn't they?" Maria asked quietly. William nodded grimly. "3 representatives are downstairs. They're claiming legal authority to remove Emma, which means they've fabricated some kind of custody or child welfare complaint. It's a common intimidation tactic. They threaten to separate you from Emma unless you comply with their demands." Emma looked up at her mother with wide eyes. "Are the bad people here, Mom?" Maria knelt down to Emma's level, her voice gentle but serious. "Yes, Mija, but Mr. Chen is going to help us. Remember what we practiced. If anyone asks you questions, you tell them you want to talk to your mum and Mr. Chen first." William walked to his wall safe and retrieved a thick folder he'd been preparing since Friday. "Maria, I've spent the weekend investigating global cultural dynamics. What I found is going to change everything." He opened the folder and spread documents across his desk. "Your former firm isn't just exploiting workers. They're running an international operation that manipulates cultural consultants to facilitate corporate espionage." Maria's eyes widened as she examined the documents. Bank records, email correspondences, and government contracts painted a picture of a company that used cultural expertise to help American corporations steal trade secrets and intellectual property from international partners. "This is worse than I thought," Maria whispered. "I knew they were exploiting workers, but this..." She pointed to a document showing payments from defense contractors. "They're selling cultural intelligence to help companies manipulate foreign governments." Emma, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "Like when kids pretend to be friends with someone just to find out their secrets?" William and Maria exchanged glances. Once again, Emma had distilled a complex situation into its essential truth. "Exactly like that, Emma. And your mom discovered their secrets, so they want to stop her from telling anyone." The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Chen, the visitors are becoming increasingly aggressive. They're threatening to call Child Protective Services if you don't bring Emma downstairs immediately." William's expression hardened. "Tell them I'll be down in 5 minutes." He turned to Maria and Emma with determination. "Here's what we're going to do. Maria, you and Emma are going to my private elevator and going directly to the 46th floor. My personal attorney, Janet Morrison, is waiting there with emergency custody and immigration papers. If these people want a legal fight, they're going to get one." As Maria and Emma headed toward the private elevator, William gathered the global cultural dynamics documents and prepared for battle. He'd built his fortune by outmaneuvering competitors who underestimated him, and he wasn't about to let anyone threaten the family that had become so important to him. The 3 representatives waiting in conference room B were exactly what William had expected: expensive suits, arrogant attitudes, and the kind of corporate aggression that relied on intimidation rather than legitimate authority. The leader, a thin man with cold eyes named Richard Sterling, immediately launched into threats and demands. "Mr. Chen, Dr. Rodriguez Santos violated her non-disclosure agreements and stole proprietary methodologies when she left our company. The child has been exposed to confidential information and represents a significant security risk. We're here to escort them both to our corporate office for debriefing." William sat down across from them with calm confidence. "Mr. Sterling, I've reviewed Dr. Rodriguez Santos's original employment contract with your firm. The non-disclosure agreement was invalidated when your company engaged in illegal activities that she was legally obligated to report. Furthermore, threatening to separate a mother from her child constitutes criminal intimidation. Sterling's confident expression faltered slightly. Mr. Chen, I don't think you understand the scope of our legal authority here. We have connections throughout the corporate world and government agencies. Protecting Dr. Rodriguez Santos could seriously damage your business interests. William smiled coldly and opened his folder. Mr. Sterling, I don't think you understand who you're threatening. He spread the documents across the table. These show your company's involvement in corporate espionage, government contractor fraud, and international trade secret theft. I've already forwarded copies to the FBI, the SEC, and several congressional oversight committees. The three representatives stared at the documents in shock. Sterling's face went white as he recognized internal global cultural dynamics communications that should have been impossible for an outsider to obtain. Where did you get these? Sterling demanded. William's smile widened. Mr. Sterling, you made a critical mistake when you threatened Emma Rodriguez. That little girl has friends throughout the international business community now. It turns out that several of your former victims were very eager to share information once they learned about your tactics. Over the weekend, William had contacted every business leader Emma had helped him negotiate with over the past 3 weeks. When he explained the situation, they had been outraged to learn that global cultural dynamics had previously manipulated them through cultural consultants working under threat and coercion. The evidence against Sterling's company had poured in from around the world. You have exactly 10 minutes to leave this building, William continued, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. If you or anyone from your company ever contacts Maria or Emma Rodriguez again, I will personally ensure that every piece of evidence about your illegal activities reaches the appropriate authorities. Sterling stood up shakily, his intimidation tactics completely deflated. This isn't over, Chen. You have no idea what kind of enemies you're making. William rose to his full height, his presence filling the room. Mr. Sterling, you have no idea what kind of enemy you just made. I've built $1 billion company from nothing, and I protect what's important to me. Emma and Maria Rodriguez are under my protection now, and I suggest you remember that. As the three representatives hurried out of the building, William returned to the 46th floor, where he found Maria and Emma sitting with Janet Morrison, his attorney. Emma was coloring in a legal pad while the adults discussed paperwork, seemingly unaffected by the dramatic events swirling around her. How did it go? Maria asked anxiously. They're gone, William said with satisfaction, and they won't be back. Janet, were you able to prepare the documents we discussed? Janet nodded, sliding a stack of papers across the table. Everything's ready. Emergency custody protection, immigration status updates, and employment contracts that provide legal justification for Emma's consulting work. Maria, you and Emma are now legally protected under several federal statutes. Emma looked up from her coloring. Does this mean the bad people can't take me away from Mom? William knelt down beside her chair, his expression gentle but serious. Emma, no one is ever going to separate you from your mother. I promise you that. Neddy. As afternoon sunlight filled the conference room, William realized that the confrontation with global cultural dynamics had revealed something important about his own feelings. Somewhere over the past 3 weeks, Maria and Emma had stopped being employees and had become something much more significant. They had become family. But William also knew that defeating Sterling's immediate threat was only the beginning. Global cultural dynamics had powerful connections and extensive resources. The real battle for Emma and Maria's safety was just beginning, and William was prepared to use every resource at his disposal to protect them. That evening, as Emma helped her mother pack their belongings from their small apartment to move into the secure corporate housing William had arranged, none of them realized that Patricia Hartman was sitting in her car across the street, making phone calls to people who made global cultural dynamics look like amateurs. 2 months had passed since the confrontation with global cultural dynamics, and life had settled into a routine that felt almost too good to be true. Emma had her own security detail, discreet but professional bodyguards who posed as William's regular staff. Maria had taken to her new role as senior cultural advisor with remarkable success, helping William close deals that had been stalled for years. But on this particular Thursday evening, as William worked late in his office reviewing contracts, Emma made a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about their situation. Emma had been exploring the 46th floor, which housed the executive archives and older company records. Her natural curiosity had led her to a section of files that dated back to William's early business ventures. As she flipped through documents she couldn't fully understand, one photograph stopped her cold. The black and white image showed a much younger William standing next to a couple at what appeared to be a business conference. The man was Asian, well-dressed, and bore a striking resemblance to William. The woman was Latina, elegant, and had Emma's exact eyes and facial structure. Emma stared at the photograph for a long moment, her 7-year-old mind trying to process what she was seeing. The woman in the picture looked like an older version of herself, and the man looked like William's brother or cousin. But it was the inscription on the back of the photograph that made Emma's heart race. William Chen, David Chen, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Partnership Agreement Signing, Mexico City, 1995. Dr. Elena Rodriguez. Emma's middle name was Elena, the same name her mother used when she revealed her true identity. But Maria had said her full name was Maria Elena Rodriguez Santos. Was Elena Rodriguez a different person, or was there something about her mother's past that even Emma didn't know? Emma carefully took the photograph and returned to William's office, where she found him on a video call with business partners in Singapore. She waited quietly until the call ended, then approached his desk with the photograph in her hand. "Mr. Chen," Emma said softly, "I found something in the old files. I think you might know my family." William looked at the photograph and froze. The image brought back memories he'd buried for decades. His older brother David, the business partner who had been killed in a car accident in Mexico City 25 years ago, and David's brilliant wife Eleanor, who had disappeared after the tragedy. "Emma," William said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "where exactly did you find this?" Emma pointed toward the archives. In a box marked International Partnerships 1995, there were lots of papers about business deals in Mexico and South America. She paused, studying William's shocked expression. "The lady in the picture looks like me, and the man looks like you." William's hands trembled as he held the photograph. David Chen had been more than his business partner. He'd been William's only family, his mentor, and his closest friend. When David died in that suspicious car accident in Mexico City, William had been devastated. Elena Rodriguez had been David's wife and business partner, a brilliant cultural consultant who had helped them establish their first international operations. "Emma," William said carefully, "I need you to get your mother right away. Don't tell her about the photograph yet. Just ask her to come to my office for an important conversation." When Maria arrived 5 minutes later, William was standing by his window with his back to the door. Emma sat in her usual chair, the photograph face down on the desk in front of her. "Maria," William said without turning around, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the complete truth. What was your maiden name before you married Emma's father?" Maria's face went pale. "William, why are you asking me that?" William turned around and looked directly at her. "Because I think Elena Rodriguez was my sister-in-law, and Emma might be my niece." The silence in the room was deafening. Maria sat down heavily in the chair next to Emma, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Emma looked back and forth between the two adults, sensing that something enormous was happening, but not understanding what. "Show her the photograph, Emma," William said gently. Emma turned over the photograph and slid it across the desk to her mother. Maria's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Tears filled her eyes, and her hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Oh my God," Maria whispered. "William, you're David's little brother. You were just starting college when—" She couldn't finish the sentence. William sat down across from them, his own eyes filling with tears. "Elena, I looked for you after David died. I spent years trying to find you and the baby Elena was carrying. The authorities said you'd both disappeared, possibly killed in the same accident that took David." Emma's eyes widened as the pieces of the puzzle came together in her mind. "Mom, were you married before? Is Mr. Chen my uncle?" Maria reached over and took Emma's hand. "Mija, your father was David Chen, William's older brother. You are William's niece. When your father was killed, I was 8 months pregnant with you. The people who killed him were looking for me too, so I had to disappear to protect you." William felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. For 7 years, he'd been unknowingly surrounded by the family he'd lost and grieved. Emma wasn't just a brilliant little girl who happened to work in his building. She was David's daughter, his own flesh and blood. "Emma," William said, his voice thick with emotion, "your father was the most important person in my life. He taught me everything about business, about integrity, about being a good man. When he died, I thought I'd lost my only family forever." Emma stood up and walked around the desk to where William was sitting. Without hesitation, she climbed into his lap and hugged him tightly. "Uncle William," she said simply, as if the relationship had always been obvious to her, "Dad would be proud of how you took care of us." The three of them sat together in the gathering twilight, finally understanding the forces that had brought them together. William realized that Emma's extraordinary intelligence wasn't just inherited from Maria. She had David's analytical mind and natural business instincts. Her ability to understand complex cultural dynamics came from both sides of her remarkable heritage. But as the initial shock of their reunion began to fade, William's mind turned to darker implications. If Emma was David's daughter, then the people who had killed his brother might still be interested in eliminating David's family line. Global cultural dynamics might have been just the beginning of their problems. "Elena," William said, using Maria's real name for the first time, "the people who killed David, do you know who they were?" Maria nodded grimly. "A consortium of American defense contractors who were afraid that David's ethical business practices would expose their corruption in international deals. They've been hunting us for 7 years, William. Global cultural dynamics was just their latest attempt to find us." William's expression hardened with determination and rage. The people who had killed his brother had spent 7 years terrorizing his sister-in-law and threatening his niece. But now Emma and Elena had something they'd never had before, the full protection and resources of someone who loved them and had the power to fight back. "They made one critical mistake," William said with cold fury. "They let me find my family. Now they're going to discover what happens when you threaten a Chen." Day outside the building, Patricia Hartman made her final phone call to the consortium that had been hunting Elena Rodriguez for 7 years. But she had no idea that she'd just signed her own termination papers by revealing the location of the most protected family in San Francisco. The final confrontation came on a Friday morning when Emma was supposed to be in school, but a teacher development day had left her spending the morning in William's office. She was contentedly working on homework while William and Elena prepared for a critical board meeting that would determine the future of Chen Industries' international expansion. Patricia Hartman had been feeding information to David Chen's killers for months, believing she was simply reporting on a security risk to the company. When she learned that Emma was actually David's daughter, she'd made the call that brought the most dangerous people in Elena's past directly to William's door. The attack came swiftly and without warning. 6 men in business suits entered the building through a service entrance that Patricia had provided access to. They moved with military precision toward the executive floors, their goal simple: eliminate Elena Rodriguez and her daughter once and for all. But William had not survived in the brutal world of international business by being unprepared. The security system Elena had insisted on installing after the global cultural dynamics incident was state-of-the-art, and the moment the intruders breached the service entrance, alarms began sounding throughout the building. "Emma, come here now," William said with calm urgency as security alerts flashed on his computer screen. Emma immediately abandoned her homework and ran to his side, her 7-year-old instincts recognizing the seriousness in his voice. William activated the building's emergency lockdown protocol, sealing the executive floors and trapping the intruders between the 40th and 42nd floors. Elena burst into the office from her adjacent workspace, her face pale but determined. "How many?" she asked, checking the security monitors. "6 professionals," William replied, his fingers flying over his keyboard as he coordinated with building security and the private protection team he'd hired after learning Emma's true identity. "They're armed and moving with military precision. This isn't global cultural dynamics. These are the people who killed David." Emma looked up at her mother and uncle with frightened but brave eyes. "Are they here to hurt us?" Elena knelt down and took Emma's hands. "Mija, these are very bad people who hurt your father before you were born. But Uncle William has prepared for this day, and we're going to be safe." What the attackers didn't know was that William had spent the past 2 months turning his building into a fortress. Every executive floor had been retrofitted with military-grade security measures, safe rooms with independent communication systems, and escape routes that even his own employees didn't know about. The confrontation lasted 47 minutes. The attackers, expecting to find a vulnerable woman and child, instead encountered a coordinated defense that included private security, local law enforcement, and FBI agents who had been investigating the consortium that ordered David Chen's murder for over 2 decades. Patricia Hartman's betrayal had inadvertently provided federal authorities with the evidence they needed to finally arrest the people responsible for multiple murders, corporate espionage, and international terrorism. When the attackers realized they'd walked into a trap, they attempted to retreat, but found every exit sealed and federal agents waiting for them. As the last of the attackers was led away in handcuffs, Emma sat in her uncle's lap, watching the dramatic events unfold through the office windows. Instead of being traumatized by the violence, she seemed fascinated by the strategic complexity of the operation William had orchestrated. "Uncle William," Emma said thoughtfully, "you planned all of this, didn't you? You knew they would come eventually." William hugged his niece tighter, marveling once again at her ability to understand complex situations. "Yes, Emma. From the moment I learned who you really were, I knew we had to be ready to protect our family." Elena stood nearby, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in 7 years, they were tears of relief rather than fear. "It's really over?" she asked. FBI agent Sarah Martinez, who had been leading the investigation into the consortium, entered the office with a satisfied expression. "Dr. Rodriguez, the people who killed your husband are finally in federal custody. The evidence we gathered today will put them away for life. You and Emma are safe now." "No." As afternoon sunlight filled the office where their family had been reunited, William realized that the past 3 months had transformed all of their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Emma wasn't just his brilliant cultural consultant, she was the daughter his brother had never lived to see grow up. Elena wasn't just his most valuable employee, she was the sister-in-law he'd mourned for 7 years. "So, what happens now?" Emma asked, looking up at the two most important adults in her life. William and Elena exchanged glances, and in that moment they both understood that their unusual business arrangement had evolved into something much more significant. They were a family, bound together by love, loss, and the extraordinary little girl who had brought them together. "Now we build the future that your father would have wanted," William said, his voice filled with determination and hope. "Chen Industries is going to become the most ethical and successful international business in the world, and you're going to help us do it." Emma grinned, her face lighting up with the excitement and confidence that had captured William's attention that first day in the conference room. "Can I have my own business cards?" As laughter filled the office, Patricia Hartman was being led away in handcuffs, her career and freedom forfeited for her betrayal. But in the executive suite of Chen Industries, a family that had been torn apart by tragedy was finally whole again. Emma Rodriguez Chen would grow up to revolutionize international business, building bridges between cultures and creating partnerships based on mutual respect and understanding. But she would always remember that her greatest achievement was bringing her uncle and mother together, healing wounds that had festered for 7 years, and proving that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries come from the most unexpected places. 6 months later, Emma would stand before the United Nations Junior Assembly, speaking in perfect Mandarin about the importance of cultural understanding in global peace efforts. But that's another story for another day. Today, a 7-year-old girl who had started as an invisible observer in a corporate conference room had become the heart of a business empire built on family, integrity, and the belief that the smallest voices often carry the most powerful truths.